Religious guilt can feel like the voice of God, but Spinoza forces us to ask whether it is really just fear wearing holy clothing. You know this feeling. It does not announce itself politely. It rises before you even finish a thought. A choice you made, a desire you felt, a moment of doubt, a word you said, or simply a version of yourself that did not match the version you were told you should be. And before any understanding arrives, the verdict is already inside you. Shame, unworthiness, the slow and heavy certainty that you have failed something sacred. This is not just guilt about a specific act. For many people, the guilt goes deeper than any single mistake. It becomes a condition, a permanent atmosphere, a sense that being human itself, with all of its contradictions, hungers, doubts, and imperfections, is already a kind of sin. The exhaustion that comes from this is real. You cannot rest from it because it is not tied to something you did last Tuesday. It is tied to what you are. And that kind of guilt does not correct anything. It just weighs. What Spinoza will offer you in this lesson is not permission to ignore harm you have caused. It is not a philosophical excuse to stop caring about how your actions affect other people. Responsibility is not the enemy here. Spinoza himself believed that reason and understanding make human beings more capable of genuine moral action, not less. What he challenges is the idea that paralyzing shame is the same as genuine moral awareness. It is not. And the moment you understand the difference between responsibility and guilt as an emotion that destroys clarity, something in you begins to move toward freedom. The common belief is that guilt is a sign of moral health, that if you feel guilty, it means your conscience is working, that people who do not feel guilt are dangerous, and people who feel a great deal of it are therefore especially good. This sounds reasonable on the surface, but look more carefully and the logic begins to collapse. Because guilt in its most destructive form does not produce better choices. It produces paralysis. It produces compulsive self-punishment. It produces shame that circles back endlessly without ever arriving at understanding or repair. There is a difference between the brief, sharp recognition that you have caused harm and that you should act to correct it, and the relentless, grinding weight of guilt that keeps you pinned beneath a verdict you cannot appeal. The first is useful. It moves you towards something. The second is a prison. It does not ask you to grow. It only asks you to suffer. And when guilt stops producing understanding and starts producing only suffering, Spinoza would say it has stopped being wisdom and has become something far more dangerous. A passive emotion that controls the mind without enlightening it. The hidden enemy is not the specific rule you were taught. It is the inheritance you never examined. From the moment you were born into a family, a culture, a religious tradition, or a social world, you absorbed a set of beliefs about what you are allowed to be. What is pure and what is tainted. What God approves of and what God condemns. What makes you worthy of belonging and what casts you out. Most of these beliefs entered you before you had the intellectual tools to examine them. They did not arrive as arguments. They arrived as atmosphere. And here is where the prison builds itself quietly, Because when a belief about guilt enters you that early and that completely, it does not feel like a belief. It feels like reality. It feels like the truth of what you are. A child who is told repeatedly that their natural desires are sinful does not grow up to think, "I was told my desires are sinful." They grow up thinking, "I am sinful." The belief has fused with identity, and now guilt is no longer a warning system. It is a self. A permanent resident inside the mind that does not wait for evidence before delivering its sentence. This is what Spinoza understood about what he called passive emotions. They are emotions that happen to you rather than through you. You do not choose the shame. You do not decide to feel crushed. You are moved by forces outside your understanding. Forces that were planted by other people's fears, other people's interpretations, other people's need for control, and now those forces move inside you as if they were your own voice. The guilt feels sacred because it speaks in the language of your most trusted authorities. But that does not make it wisdom. It makes it inherited power. Look around at the modern world and you will find guilt everywhere in forms both ancient and new. In families where love was given conditionally, where approval had to be earned by becoming the right kind of person. In religious communities where the language of purity made ordinary human experience feel like contamination. In cultures of performance and social judgment where being seen to fail carries a punishment that feels almost spiritual in its totality. The guilt you carry may have roots in a sermon you heard at 10 years old, or a parent who could not separate love from control, or a community that used shame as its primary tool of belonging. And today, the mirror has become enormous. The internet has created a new theater of moral outrage where guilt is produced and weaponized at industrial speed. People are convicted in comment sections. Entire identities are reduced to a single mistake. The inner courtroom that Spinoza would have recognized in the 17th century has now been given a public stage, and the audience never sleeps. Meanwhile, in private, quietly, there are people who sit with guilt that no one else even knows about, a thought they had, a desire they cannot explain, a doubt about something they were told is beyond doubt. The guilt is real, the suffering is real. And yet no one has ever stopped to ask, what exactly caused this feeling, and is its cause actually what I believe it to be? If this is already beginning to feel like something important, take a moment and press the like button on this video. Not for the algorithm, because somewhere right now someone else is sitting silently under the weight of this guilt and they need to find this lesson. Your simple action can put it in their path. That matters more than you might think. Baruch Spinoza lived in the 17th century in a world surrounded by religious authority, moral condemnation, and the terror of divine punishment. He was excommunicated from his own community at the age of 23, cut off from family and social belonging, forbidden, and yet he did not respond with bitterness or collapse. He responded with clarity. He sat down to understand. And what he produced was one of the most radical and liberating analyses of human emotion ever written. A philosophy that refused to judge emotions as good or evil, and instead asked a far more precise question. what causes them. Spinoza was not afraid of emotion. He was not asking human beings to become cold or detached. What he was doing was something far more powerful. He was insisting that the emotions that run our lives, the fear, the guilt, the shame, the longing, the sadness, are not mysterious supernatural forces. They are effects. They have causes. They arise from something specific, from beliefs, from memories, from the way the mind interprets experience. And once you begin to understand the cause of an emotion, you are no longer simply its prisoner. You begin to recover the capacity to think. Spinoza's core insight is that nothing in the universe, including what happens inside the human mind, happens without a cause. Every emotion you feel arose from something. It was produced. It is an effect. Guilt is no exception. When you feel guilty, that guilt did not fall from the sky. It was generated by a specific combination of beliefs you hold, rules you were taught, interpretations your mind made, memories that carry emotional weight, and authorities whose judgments you internalized as your own. When you feel it, it feels absolute. But it is, in Spinoza's language, always an effect of prior causes. This is not a small idea. Because the moment you genuinely accept that guilt is produced by causes, you stop treating it as if it were a window into sacred truth. You start asking a different set of questions. Instead of accepting the verdict of guilt as final, you ask, who taught me this rule? What memory is attached to this feeling? Which interpretation of my action am I using, and is that interpretation accurate? Did I actually harm someone, or did I violate a rule that was installed in me by someone else's fear? These questions are not acts of moral evasion. They are acts of intellectual seriousness. They are exactly what Spinoza would demand. And here is where the law of causes becomes genuinely liberating. Because many of the things that produce religious guilt are not actual harms. They are violations of inherited categories. Thoughts that were labeled forbidden. Desires that were declared unclean, doubts that were treated as betrayal. The guilt produced by these violations feels identical to the guilt produced by genuinely harmful action. Your nervous system cannot tell the difference. Your inner courtroom does not automatically distinguish between the guilt of having hurt someone you love and the guilt of having doubted a doctrine you were told was absolute. Spinoza gives you the tool to make that distinction yourself. Spinoza distinguished between two fundamentally different ways of being in relation to your own emotions. The first is the passive state. In the passive state, the emotion moves you without your understanding it. You feel guilt, and the guilt controls your thinking, your choices, your sense of self, and your relationship to reality, all without you ever having examined what caused it or whether the cause actually justifies the verdict. You are being lived by the emotion rather than living through it. The second is the active state. This does not mean that the emotion disappears. It does not mean that you become numb or that understanding erases pain. What it means is that the mind begins to understand the emotion from within. You trace the guilt back to its cause. You recognize where the belief came from. You examine whether the interpretation is adequate. And in doing this, the emotion loses its blind, tyrannical power over you. It does not necessarily vanish, but it no longer governs you from behind a curtain you cannot see through. This is what Spinoza means when he speaks of freedom. He is not describing freedom from feeling. He is describing freedom from being unconsciously controlled by feelings whose causes you have never examined. Guilt that is understood becomes something you can work with. You can ask whether it is pointing to a genuine harm that requires repair, or whether it is the echo of someone else's fear, dressed in the language of the sacred. That distinction is not irresponsibility. It is the beginning of genuine moral clarity. And Spinoza would say that genuine moral clarity produces far better action than blind shame ever could. You are not a stained soul. You are a human being who has been affected by causes. There is a profound difference between those two statements, and the distance between them is the distance between a life spent in shame and a life lived with understanding. A stained soul cannot change its nature. It can only beg for mercy. But a human being affected by causes can examine those causes, understand them, and begin to relate to them differently. Irresponsibility is always open. Spinoza believed this with complete seriousness. The guilt you carry about who you are, what you have desired, what you have doubted, what you could not control in yourself, that guilt was not handed to you by reality. It was produced by a set of beliefs and experiences working together inside your mind. Some of those beliefs were given to you by people who were themselves afraid. Some were given to you by institutions whose power depended on your feeling small. Some were the honest attempts of people who loved you but did not know how to communicate moral wisdom without using the weapon of shame. None of this makes you broken, it makes you human. And the Spinoza lesson here is not, do not feel anything. It is, do not accept every emotional verdict as absolute truth without examining what produced it. You are not required to worship your own suffering. You are not required to treat the internal voice of shame as if it were more trustworthy than your own reasoning mind. Spinoza trusted the human mind enough to believe it could understand itself. And that trust is itself a kind of liberation. Here is how guilt attaches to identity and why it becomes so difficult to release. When a rule is violated, even in imagination, even in a passing thought, the mind produces a judgment. That judgment arrives with an emotional charge. Discomfort, fear, shame, a sense of wrongness. If this happens once and is examined, it passes. But when guilt is produced repeatedly, attached to the same kinds of thoughts or desires or doubts, over months and years, it stops feeling like a judgment about a specific act. It starts feeling like a description of a permanent self. Not I did something wrong, but I am wrong. Spinoza would describe this as the mind confusing the emotion for the reality. The guilt feels like accurate information about your nature because it is so consistent, so persistent, so familiar. But persistence is not truth. A chain that has been worn long enough starts to feel like skin. The prisoner who has never left the cell begins to think that the walls describe the world. The guilt that has been present since childhood becomes so woven into the experience of being you that examining it feels like examining your own existence. And then there is the courtroom inside the mind. Spinoza did not use this image, but it follows from his thinking with precision. There is a judge inside the guilty mind that never rests. It reviews the evidence constantly. It finds new violations. It delivers verdicts that feel final. And the cruelest feature of this inner courtroom is that it does not accept adequate defense. You can explain yourself all you want, reason with yourself all you want, and the judge continues. Because this judge is not operating by the standards of reason. It is operating by the standards of the original authority that planted the rule. This is the mechanism Spinoza asks you to see clearly. Guilt does not just arise and disappear. For many people, it becomes a structure, an interior architecture. It organizes how they see themselves, how they relate to their own desires, how they respond to moments of human imperfection. And once it becomes a structure, it begins to select evidence. The mind under guilt notices every violation and minimizes every moment of genuine goodness. It is not neutral. It is actively working to confirm a verdict that was handed down before the trial even began. Here is what Spinoza would not allow you to avoid. Some guilt is designed not to make you wiser, but to make you smaller. There are systems, religious, social, and familial, that use guilt not as a tool for moral growth, but as a tool for control. When guilt is functioning as control, it does not point you toward understanding or repair. It points you toward compliance. It keeps you obedient. It keeps you afraid to question. It keeps you returning to the authority that produces the guilt for relief. From the guilt that the authority produces, that is not freedom. That is a closed loop of dependency. The uncomfortable difference Spinoza forces you to confront is this. Responsibility asks, what did I do? What caused it? And how can I understand and repair the harm? Guilt, in its most destructive form, asks none of these questions. It simply repeats the verdict. Responsibility moves forward. Guilt keeps you nailed to the past. Responsibility wants understanding. Guilt wants punishment. And when you spend your life being punished by your own mind for the crime of being human, you do not become more ethical. You become more exhausted. And exhausted minds do not produce wisdom. They produce compliance. They produce fear. They produce the next generation of people who confuse shame with goodness. If you are beginning to see the difference, if something in this is shifting the way you understand what has been living inside you, write the word freedom in the comments right now. Not because it is a small thing, because choosing responsibility over shame is one of the most serious and difficult decisions a human mind can make. And naming that choice in writing is the beginning of making it real. The first practice Spinoza offers is deceptively simple and profoundly demanding. It is this. When you feel guilt, do not immediately obey it. Stop and name what caused it. Not the surface answer, not I feel guilty because I am a bad person. The actual cause. What specific belief is active right now? What rule was formed, when and by whom? What memory is this emotion attached to? What interpretation of your action are you using, and is that interpretation the only possible one? This is harder than it sounds because guilt by its nature does not want to be examined. It wants to be obeyed. It wants you to accept the verdict and begin the punishment without questioning the judge. But Spinoza's entire philosophy is built on the premise that clarity is always more powerful than obedience to unexamined forces. The moment you can say, "I feel guilty because I was taught that this desire is forbidden," and that teaching came from an authority whose own motives I have never examined, you have done something revolutionary. You have introduced daylight into a room that was kept deliberately dark. Name the source of the rule. Was it your family, a religious institution, a culture? A person who had power over you and used guilt to keep that power? Was it a genuine moral community, or was it a system that needed your shame to survive? This naming is not betrayal. It is the act of a mind that has decided to become active rather than passive. Spinoza would call this the beginning of adequate understanding. And adequate understanding is the first condition of genuine freedom. The second step is to separate the emotion from the self. Guilt is something you feel. It is not something you are. This sounds obvious, but for a mind shaped by years of shame-based belief, it is not obvious at all. When guilt has been present long enough, it becomes the feeling of being yourself. Releasing it can feel like losing your identity. But you are not losing yourself. You are recovering yourself from underneath an emotion that was mistaken for a permanent fact. Spinoza understood that the mind, when confused, tends to mistake its own states for external realities. You do not just feel guilty. You believe that the guilt is accurate information about your essential nature. And so, you protect it. You defend the verdict against your own self. You resist every idea that might lift the sentence, because lifting the sentence feels like denying something true. But the truth is that no emotion, no matter how intense, no matter how familiar, is a direct mirror of your essential self. Emotions are effects of causes. They are not definitions. To separate pain from identity is to begin saying, "I am experiencing guilt," rather than "I am guilty." It is a shift in language that reflects a shift in philosophical position. The first statement is a report, the second is a verdict. And Spinoza's philosophy insists that you do not have to live under a verdict that was never fairly tried. You can investigate, you can examine the evidence. You can refuse to accept that an emotion, however powerful, has the right to determine who you fundamentally are. This is not denial. This is the beginning of honest, active understanding. Spinoza believed that what we encounter shapes what we become. The ideas we meet, the communities we move through, the voices we allow access to our inner life. All of these are encounters, and all of them affect the power of the mind to think clearly and freely. If you spend your life surrounded by voices that produce shame without understanding, that demand obedience without explanation, that use guilt as their primary language of relationship, your mind will be shaped by that encounter. It is not a spiritual failing. It is how minds work. The practice here is not to withdraw from all difficulty or to seek only comfortable agreement. It is to become deliberate about the quality of encounter, Seek communities of people who take moral life seriously without using shame as their instrument. Seek thinkers and teachers who distinguish between accountability and condemnation. Seek the kinds of conversation where mistakes are examined, learned from, and allowed to end rather than becoming permanent definitions. Spinoza himself lived in small, deliberate intellectual community, corresponding with thinkers who challenged him honestly without crushing his capacity to reason. This is not about leaving behind everything from your past. Some of what you inherited has genuine moral wisdom in it. The practice is to become the one who examines rather than the one who simply absorbs. To encounter an idea critically is not to reject it automatically. It is to give it the serious treatment of a mind that refuses to be passively moved. And the more your encounters increase your capacity for understanding and dignity rather than your capacity for self-condemnation, the more you will find that clarity, not shame, becomes the atmosphere in which your moral life breathes. The fourth step is perhaps the most philosophically demanding. Spinoza believed that everything that happens, including the causes that shaped you, the beliefs that were planted in you, the pain you experienced, the mistakes you made, happened necessarily given the causes that preceded them. This is not fatalism. It is not a reason to stop caring. It is a reason to stop punishing yourself for being exactly what the causes made you, while also recognizing that understanding those causes is itself a new cause that can change what comes next. You could not have been other than you were, given everything that formed you. That sentence can sound discouraging, but Spinoza means it as liberation, because it removes the demand for a kind of impossible purity. The demand that you should have known better before you had the means to know, that you should have been stronger before you had the strength, that you should have understood before understanding arrived. You could not have. And punishing yourself for being what the causes made you is not wisdom. It is cruelty dressed in moral language. What you can do is what you are doing right now. Understand. Understanding the causes is not surrendering to them. It is the act that makes genuine repair and genuine change possible. When you understand why you behaved as you did, you become capable of choosing differently. Not through shame, not through the threat of punishment, but through the clear recognition that you now possess a better idea than the one that produced the harmful action. That is Spinoza's version of moral growth. Not self-flagellation followed by temporary improvement. Genuine change produced by genuine understanding. That is responsibility at its most powerful. Let us hold everything clearly before we close. Guilt is not a sacred object. It is an emotion, an effect produced by specific causes, beliefs absorbed from authority, memories charged with fear, rules installed before you had the tools to examine them, interpretations your mind made in the absence of better information. The guilt you feel is real. The suffering it creates is real, but its claim to be the final truth about your nature is not real. It is a claim made by an unexamined cause posing as a divine judgment. Responsibility is something entirely different. Responsibility says, I understand what I did. I understand the causes that moved me. I understand the harm, and I am now using that understanding to act better. Responsibility is active. It produces repair, learning, and genuine moral growth. Guilt in its most destructive form is passive. It produces only the repetition of the verdict. And freedom in Spinoza's sense is not the freedom to do anything without consequence. It is the freedom that comes when the mind understands its own causes and is no longer unconsciously controlled by forces it has never examined. That freedom is available to you. It was always available. You began this video as someone who may have experienced guilt as something sacred, as a voice with divine authority, as a permanent feature of your inner life. You can leave it as something different, not as someone who no longer cares about right and wrong, but as someone who has chosen to examine the causes of their moral emotions rather than simply obey them. A mind that examines is not a mind that has lost its conscience. It is a mind that has taken its conscience seriously enough to ask hard questions. This is the identity that Spinoza's philosophy invites you into. Not the condemned self, stained by inherited shame, waiting for a mercy that never quite arrives, but the responsible mind, clear about its causes, honest about its history, capable of genuine repair, and no longer in bondage to a courtroom inside itself where the judge was appointed by fear, and the verdict was delivered before the evidence was ever examined. That shift is not small. It is the beginning of a life lived from understanding rather than from shame. We began with a question. Religious guilt can feel like the voice of God, but is it? Or is it fear wearing holy clothing? You have now sat with Spinoza's answer. Fear can dress itself in every language available to it, including the language of the sacred. And a mind that cannot distinguish between the voice of genuine moral understanding and the voice of inherited fear wearing sacred clothing will spend its life obeying a judge that was never honest, a court that was never fair, and a verdict that was never about truth. Spinoza does not ask you to abandon your faith or your moral commitments. He asks you to examine what is really speaking when that voice rises inside you. If this lesson has moved something in you, if the weight has shifted even slightly, subscribe to Spinoza Reveals. This channel exists because there are ideas that do not offer comfort in the ordinary sense, but offer something far more enduring. Understanding. And understanding, as Spinoza knew, is the only form of freedom that cannot be taken from you by any external authority. There is more of this philosophy ahead. More causes to trace, more illusions to examine, more chains to make visible. Stay close.